How much do you know about Antarctica? Welcome to the Everything Antarctica podcast, where your hosts Matty Jordan and Jonny Harrison will answer all of your questions. We'll talk to globally recognised experts, discuss current affairs, news, and ultimately highlight why Antarctica should matter to you. Come on a journey as we unpack everything you've ever wondered about the world's most extreme environment. Welcome to this week's episode of the Everything Antarctica podcast. I'm your host, Matty Jordan. I'm joined once again by Jonny Harrison. And today we are talking about photography in Antarctica. This is a topic that's pretty close to both of our hearts. We love a bit of content creation. We love a bit of photography and videography. So we're going to chat about that today.
Sounds like we might be here all day at this rate.
We could be, but we're trying to limit the episodes to a reasonable amount of time so people don't get bored. But we'll have a go today.
Sounds good. Where do you want to start today?
We could start with gear. Chat through some of the stuff that we take down. I know that both of us probably take a bit of an excess amount of stuff down with us, but let's talk about gear.
Yeah, okay. I guess a good place to start with that is just like most cold environments, I suppose there's kind of different types of gear or considerations that you need to think about when you're talking about gear. So one of the big ones is battery life is always going to be a problem. Another thing is tripods. So tripods with latches rather than the screw legs. They hold up better. The screw legs, they seem to contract and cool in the temperature change, and then they slowly slump to one side, which is never good.
Yeah.
But so there's plenty of things like that. And the other one is most of the brands today function pretty well, and the amount of content that you can get just on your cell phone is just phenomenal. And I mean, the quality of those has just come so far in the last few years, for sure.
For sure, yeah. I was really hoping that you were going to bring that up as well, because a lot of people, when they go down to Antarctica, they think that they need to have the latest and greatest and the most expensive gear and things like that. And often you see people that will come down and haven't really had much experience using, digital SLRs or mirrorless cameras or anything with large zoom or manual settings and things like that. And once they realise how challenging it is, they often just use their phone most of the time anyway, and the quality of the images that come out of that are pretty good. So
yeah, I often say that the best camera is the one that you got on you, right? So actually having something that is accessible and something that's usable, something you're familiar with and you feel comfortable with, I mean, they fit in your pocket and you can pretty well take them anywhere. So even so, the battery life on phones, you do find that range kind of degrades quite quickly when you start getting into those colder temperatures, right?
Yeah, I actually found a useful little hint, a little trick and tip from taking my phone out in super cold temperatures. And when I knew I was going to be out for a long period of time, I would put a foot warmer on the battery on the back of the phone. And I did have an occasion actually when I was sitting in the back of a Haglin on quite a long adventure, and I'd put the foot warmer on the back, and it actually started telling me that my phone was overheating because it wasn't out in the cold for long enough.
Yeah.
But when we were outside and I did have that on there, I found that my phone lasted just as long as it would in any sort of normal temperature.
Yeah, and then I suppose that go on that point, most of the time if you've got other camera batteries and things like that, it's often you'll put those in your pocket so that they're right up close to your chest or sort of inside one of your layers rather than on the outside. So it keeps it a bit warmer, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah. The other thing I found with phones is it's quite hard to use a touch screen with gloves and stuff on, so I often found myself using my nose just to press up against the little camera thing to activate it, to turn it on, and then using the side buttons to actually take an image or whatever. But you'd often see me with a phone up here, and then I'd be on the camera and I'd be swiping across to get to video mode, and then hitting the side of the button to activate the video. So there's a few little random things that you can't avoid, but you don't really want to be taking your fingers out just to turn your phone on or to open up your camera app. So
absolutely, you take for granted how useful touchscreens are, but you sort of take away that functionality and it limits a device like that very quickly. The other thing that I found, mostly shooting with SLRs and mirrorless cameras, is that all my eyelashes on one eye suddenly disappeared, and somebody sort of pointed it out one day, and then it was only a while later that I realised that you're sort of looking through this camera and then your hot breath coming up, and so that's kind of heating everything up, and the moisture in your breath ends up meaning that you freeze your eyelashes to your viewfinder, and then pull that away, and off come one or two at a time. So
I found that with my nose as well. As I was putting that up to my eye, my nose was hitting the LCD screen on the back, and you would slowly just, I've never licked a pole outside, but
it's about as close as you've come.
Yeah, definitely frozen the end of my nose to my camera. But
definitely, often I'd say to people, turn your touch screens off and all that kind of stuff, because your tactile buttons, learn them, because the when you want to use them is going to be too late. You don't want to be doing all that learning out in the field, and so you're spying a top of the line camera to take down to Antarctica. Well, that's wonderful, and you'll probably get some okay images out of it. Actually understanding the equipment before you go is far more important. So, and the other side of it is, like, there's so much good second-hand gear around these days that it doesn't probably have to be the latest and greatest with all the features. If you don't use that kind of equipment day to day and know what those features are and how to use them, chances are they're just going to be lost on you when you get down there.
So. All of my gear that I took down was secondhand. I didn't buy any camera gear brand new, and it worked fine. It's a little bit older than what the latest and greatest is, but it did the job just fine. And
it makes you feel not so bad, so when they do actually succumb to the elements and stop working and finally finally become fatal.
I definitely did freeze one. I had one camera that no longer works, but that was outside taking time lapses in near minus 50 degrees temperatures, and just frosted up, just ice everywhere, and then I warmed it back up too quickly, which was not good. So learned a valuable lesson there.
Yeah, so that's quite a good point to note, and obviously you don't want any condensation or anything building up on cameras. So what would you do for bringing cameras back inside after you've been outside in the cold for a while?
Yeah, it's super good, and one thing that took a bit of learning, and took getting it wrong before I spent a bit more time concentrating on it. But the first thing I would do is, if I had an excess of ice, or you can visibly see that the camera's super frozen, is I would leave it outside for a while and just very carefully use an air blower or a microfiber cloth just to dust off that ice. And once I was pretty comfortable that was all cleared away, I would bring it inside what we know as a cold porch. So it's not immediately taking it from minus 20 degrees into 18 degrees, which is the temperature of the base, but into a room that might sit at, 5 degrees or something, just above freezing but not too warm. And I would leave it in there on the tripod with the lens pointed down, and that was basically just to make sure that if there was any condensation or ice left in there, that it would drip off the end of the lens. Now, I don't know if that is there might be professional photographers out there that might say that is such a terrible idea, but that's what I found that worked for me, and it actually did a really good job. After freezing the first one, I never had any issues after that, and that was taking cameras from minus 50 degrees inside and warming them up over the period of about half a day, and it seemed to do just fine. The other thing I did do is I would make sure to take the battery out and the memory card out before I did that, because if there was any condensation, I didn't want to risk breaking any of those electronic elements. So definitely the memory card, the old SD card, I didn't want to lose the photos from the night before, so I was super cautious about that.
And even just letting it dry out, because I guess that's one thing to note, is that because it's such a dry climate, it doesn't actually take that long. So the humidity is super low, so you're kind of in a better situation as far as, at least when it does start to warm up, it's not actually going and super humid, so any of your moisture is going to stick around. It's all evaporating pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, and I heard of some people that used to put their cameras in bags, in Ziploc bags or something similar. I don't know if that was something that you did, but it wasn't something that I felt that I needed to do, but some people swear by it.
It was something I didn't really need to worry about. Most of the time, if I was doing longer times outside, I'd take my camera bag actually outside and put it down on the ground or whatever, and then I'd actually put it back in the bag and then put the bag back in my locker. So it wasn't necessarily like going through the cold porch, but the benefit was the temperature of the bag was the same temperature as all the contents. So as that slowly warmed up, and that insulated essentially the camera from everything else as well. So but yes, I have done plenty of times where I've put the camera on the tripod with the lens facing down to try and if there was any moisture that was to form into liquid, that it wouldn't roll back towards the camera sensor. Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually did have one guy there as well who would bring his camera inside and then put it inside the fridge in the kitchen, and I tried that once and had condensation all over the place, because you've got humidity from vegetables and all sorts of other things,
and you got people coming and going all day, right?
Opening the door, closing the door, Yeah.
Recipe for disaster.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, all it takes is for the chef to not see it and try and pull something from the back, and then your camera's on the floor and it's smashed into a million bits.
And then I guess that's the other side of it. Like all your plastic bits are all super brittle in the cold. So yeah, absolutely, you'd end up having a right mess.
Yeah, definitely something you want to avoid.
Yeah, I guess one random one for me, I ended up leaving cameras out for considerable time doing time lapses, same as you. And what I'd do is I actually had like an external battery that I hooked up, and then so I'd leave these cameras outside in negative 30s for like weeks.
So good.
And just keep going in each day and taking out the memory cards and swapping them
so
over.
Good. Yeah.
And what I found was with one of the cameras, it ended up not quite recording right, and I was just like, oh, what's going on here? And the battery was fine, like the battery level was not a problem, so that was all good, and the SD card was fine, so it was a bit sort of wondering what was going on. And every time I'd start it up, it would shoot fine for about probably half an hour or so, and then all of a sudden it would stop. And so I over probably the process of maybe about a week, I figured out that actually the lubrication in the shutter mechanism was probably the viscosity had changed and it was getting a little bit too sticky.
Yeah.
So the shutter speed time was going outside of what its tolerance was. So therefore it was basically said, oh, this isn't good for me. I'm not going to work. And so just shut down. So after I figured that out, I brought that camera back inside for probably about a week or so and waited to see until it actually recovered properly, and then put it back outside. I just didn't leave it outside for months and months. Yeah.
That's the benefit of being the electrician, right? Is you can fiddle around with a few of these electronic items and have a general idea of what's going on. I mean, I also employed the external battery strategy, but would have no idea how to do that had the electrician down at base not helped me out. So I bought a dummy battery, which was essentially the battery that fit inside the battery slot of my camera, had some external cables on it, and then got the electrician to wire that up to enable that to be run off an external 12-volt battery. And I mean, I wasn't getting weeks and weeks out of it, but anywhere up to 24 hours was pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. There's only so many photos that you want to take in a 24-hour period anyway, and having that somewhat limiting factor of memory cards is actually quite good.
Memory cards and external storage space as well, which became a massive issue for me as well. I just found I had hard drives just scattered all over the place, and I think I came home with something close to 20 terabytes worth of images and footage, which is like a lot, and I still haven't gone through all of it. It's going to be months before I get to finalize it all, but it means I've still got content left over to reuse later on down the line if that's what I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So what gear are you looking at for your next trip down?
It depends. I mean, if I'm back down for the winter, I'll probably invest in something that's better in low light, like higher sensitivity to low light environments, to get real-time footage of things like auroras and stuff. I mean, seeing the stuff that's coming out of the Arctic with guys filming real-time aurora video is just so special. It's just so cool to see. But unfortunately, the gear that I took down, I had a go at it, and it just came out super grainy, and it wasn't, shooting at massively high ISOs. And so I think that would probably be the first thing that I'd look into. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with the setup that I've got at the moment. I've got a bunch of sacrificial cameras that I call them, that I don't mind killing if I leave them outside for too long. Again, just secondhand gear that I picked up reasonably cheap. And yes, I think I'm pretty happy with the current setup, but I would definitely get something, more sensitive to low light. If I'm back down in summer, then I'll just take what I've got.
Yeah, that's one good thing to note. And typically, full frame sensor or larger frame sensors let in more light, and so a lot of people would go down with these cameras that sort of had crop sensors, which are kind of more angled at beginner and entry level, which is totally fine. And a lot of those even have come a long way in the last sort of 5-6 years as far as their low light sensitivity. Sensitivity is just
entry level mirrorless stuff is
phenomenal.
Pretty good.
Yeah. So pretty much nowadays, if you buy something, you'll get a reasonable result out of it. Just take the time to actually learn how to use it. Yeah,
I think so. And I mean, for summer, whatever you take down is going to be fine. When you've got enough light around, it should be no dramas.
Too much light at times.
Yeah, oftentimes there is. Which would brings things like polarizing filters and stuff into play, but not something that I've really used that much. I just tend to dial down the.
Yeah, I was much the same, and most of the time if I needed anything, the only time you'd need a polarizer really was when it was open water, so that you could kind of really capture that detail. Yeah. So other than that, I didn't really worry about them too much. But what was your favourite thing to take photos of, I suppose?
I mean, the auroras in winter were really cool, but I really love the wildlife. I mean, that for me has been pretty cool, and that is one area where you will find limitations with a phone. having a telephoto, a big zoom lens was really useful. So I had a 100 to 400 mil lens, and I did actually have a teleconverter on there. I think it was a 1.4, but didn't really use it that often because 400 mil seemed like plenty enough to get up close and personal with things like penguins and seals. And but I did find it really useful if there were orcas or minke whales or something like really far away on the ocean. Then the 400 mil wasn't quite enough depending on how far they were. But yeah, the 100 to 400, I pretty much had a camera that stayed on the entire time I was down there for things like wildlife. And actually in the winter it was really good for taking photos of the moon and other things like that. So yeah. And then the other lens that pretty much lived on my camera was a 24 to 70, and that was just useful for general day-to-day stuff and around the place. So
yeah, my first season I went down pretty much with a 16 to 35, so kind of captured very much that sort of wide angle side of things and lots of landscape stuff. And then when I went down in subsequent seasons, I ended up doing much more sort of large-scale panorama stuff, 135 mil focal length and hundreds and hundreds of images for one photo, which is a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, a couple of gigabytes in one image.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. We were speaking before about the just understanding your gear and knowing where it all is. And I don't know if you were the same, but in winter, because I didn't want to wear a head torch when you lose your night vision in the middle of the night. So I became very familiar with where all the buttons were on all my camera gear and stuff. And all I needed to do was just look at the LCD screen and make sure things were set up and just press go and know that I'd done what I needed to do. So that was super important, just knowing your camera, knowing your gear.
Totally, and also not expecting the world from your first shot, right?
Yeah.
Like the chance of, okay, the aurora's going off or the nacreous clouds are just absolutely just mind-bending, and you run outside and expect that, okay, right, I'm going to take 3 shots of this and it's going to be fine. It's like, the reality of that, unless you really, really know your stuff, the chance of that is actually pretty unlikely. So, taking the time even inside, yes, we take all this time to get ready and put all our layers of gear on. So the same process essentially applies for when you're wanting to get set up to go out and take a photo. Is your memory card in the camera?
Yeah.
Plenty of times where you run outside and you're like, oh, darn, I've got to go back inside.
Well, not only that, is your memory card empty when you put it in the camera,
That's
rather than
right.
getting outside and realise that you've got 2 photos left before you have to come back inside.
Exactly.
And then you just faff around for longer than you need to.
Totally.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually, gear, what you're wearing on your body, not so much camera gear, but I think that would make a pretty good future episode to talk about what we wear and how we stay warm when it's super cold.
Yeah, definitely. And even just the layers that you wear at different times of the year varies hugely, right?
Yeah, massive. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much it. We'll probably do another episode on photography because there's so much to cover off, but we'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much for tuning in.
If you've got any questions or any follow-up stuff to ask, flick it through and we'll answer these questions in a future episode, no doubt.
For sure, yeah. On Instagram, the podcast's got a handle at Everything Antarctica. We're also on YouTube where the episodes will come out, and pretty much all over the place as well. So go and find us there and flick us some questions and we'll try and get to them and answer them.
Nice one.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonny. Until next time, stay cool. That's it for today's episode of the Everything Antarctica podcast. Thanks for listening. If you want to find out more about us as hosts, you can find us on Instagram at Matty K. Jordan and at Johnny Harrison NZ. We're also on socials. You can find us at Everything Antarctica. This episode will be released on all streaming platforms, and the long-form video will be found on YouTube. Check us out wherever you listen to your podcasts.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating. This will really help us in our mission to make this podcast as good as it possibly can be. Please share this episode with your friends and social networks so we can spread the word to more people.
Until next time, stay cool.